been great to finally meet some of you in person and not in a two-dimensional world. So my name is Scott Drew, and I've been the superintendent here. This is my second year. And I look forward to chatting with those of you who I've not met sometime this evening. So welcome. I really appreciate you giving your evening up and spending that with us. As you know, we've extended the long-range facilities planning committee work another few months, and I'll talk about timelines in a little bit later when I give sort of an update to the process. Most importantly, around the K-8 community work group and the listening and learning sessions that are going on. And I'll go into detail about that as we progress. Housekeeping wise, the bathrooms are through these doors. If you make a right and then another right into the teacher's lounge, you'll see those in the back. And a lot of this meeting will be information sharing, and then we have in one section we'll break out into small group activities, so you can see some of the stations set up over here. But before we do that, I also wanted to introduce our new member of the committee, and that's Owen Von Flew. Owen, my boss, now on the school board, and Owen also has, as you know, a deep background in construction and development as well. So it's nice to have you, Owen. Anything else for the good of the order before we start? Nope. Well, if you see up above, we have two screens here, and you can see the agenda. We'll skip the welcome for now, and we'll get right into the norms. And then after that, we'll go over the guiding principles and a couple of other things that you've seen at each one of the other 12 meetings that we've had over the past year. And then we'll get into the script review. The script review basically is a summary of where we ended last May. And before I forget, I just wanted to say thank you to those committee members and to you, Jonah, for the many, many hours that you spent on countless drafts and putting up with all of the feedback and you know, and my granular things, you know, from the central office, and putting it together in a really nice readable format. I think it's really made a difference in terms of how we communicate the work that the committee's done so far. Even though it's not a finished document by any means, we still have work to do. I think it's a great place to start, a great jumping off point. And I also want to thank Jackie Renaud, because had Jackie not made the comment during the last meeting at the very end, these documents would have never been produced. And so I think it's just really, really helped us organize our ideas, and hopefully it's helped you also over the summer, and you've had a communication tool. If you're on the long range facilities planning committee and you're also in the K-8 work group, you've had a chance to bring that group up to speed as well with one-on-one conversations. So thank you for that. Then we'll get into the K-8 listening sessions report. I want to update you on a progress report because we're almost midway through. Hundreds of hours have gone into this project, and I want to make sure I take you through exactly where we are, what that looks like, progress to date, and some timelines that go into that. And then we'll end the evening with a kind of a what did you learn? And we have an activity that will do that. It's really painless, I promise. So if you look up above, you see that we do have norms. And I'd like everybody to look up here or the screen over here. One of the things you'll notice about me when I run meetings the same way I teach. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with Lauren, and I'd like to work clockwise around, and each one of you choose a norm, and then we'll stop, and then the next group has something else to do. So Lauren, norm number one, in a nice, loud, and proud voice, please.
Be respectful of others' ideas, opinions, and questions.
This is a good one for me. Be engaged and actively participate.
There are no bad ideas.
Meetings start on time.
Become ambassadors for the project.
Open-minded and think outside the box.
Consensus decision-making.
Be a good listener.
Keep the needs of students first.
We are an advisory group. Final decisions are by the board.
Have fun.
Have fun with 3 exclamation marks. Awesome. Everybody good with that? All right. So in consensus decision-making, I think this one's an important one just to revisit that this is a board committee and we do operate through consensus. And these are 5 bullet points I think are important. So next up, who is it? Steve, is it? Or Peter? Nope.
Thanks, Steve.
You stop. Okay.
Consensus is about honoring the input of each LRFP committee member.
Consensus is about working together as a board committee so everyone on the committee understands how decisions were made and why.
Consensus is about honoring all of the foundational work that has been done to date.
Create a parking lot for ideas.
When we cannot come to an agreement as a committee on unanimous consensus, we will place actionable items to a vote with 75% needed to break deadlock.
All good with that? They've been the same. This is the 13th time we've looked at them and I just think it's important as a matter of protocol just to go over this. Moving forward, we also, for our previous 12 meetings, had guiding principles. Let's see, Steve, why don't you read the first one?
Protect our community's investment in all of our SFSD schools.
Colin, read the second one.
Safe and high quality environment for all students.
And Dustin Haney, why don't you read the third one?
Spend our tax dollars as wisely as possible.
All good with that? Pretty straightforward. All right, so I'm going to save my superintendent's comments for later. I'll add those into my presentation back to you. If throughout this meeting tonight, if you have questions or you want additional information, any of that, just send your emails to me. I prefer that they be an email. Just email that to me. Any information that's requested, what I'd like to do is make sure that I can get that for you. Number one, that it's feasible. And number two, I'd like to have that posted on the website along with all the other wealth of information that's there on our district LRF long range facilities planning, whatever the acronym is, webpage that you can access there. But just know I'll be the contact going forward, just like I was in the spring. So having said that, Jonah, why don't I go ahead and turn it over to you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Scott.
Scott,
yes.
I'm sorry, just a quick housekeeping item. I just wanted to, most of you know Jonah, and it's been pre-COVID since we have an in-person meeting, and he's been running the online meeting, but Angela has always been involved as well. But I just want to also formally introduce Greg McCracken, who took over for Richard Higgins upon his retirement. He's partners with Jonah and Angela, and we've enjoyed having a couple meetings with Greg. So thank you for being here, Greg.
Thanks, Steve, for catching that. Sorry, Greg.
Sorry.
I'm
here to listen.
I appreciate that. Yeah, this is, thanks, Scott. And I really like to point out, Scott, you just said it really well. Jackie hit it on the head towards the end of the meeting, and that's kind of that parking lot of ideas, right? And coming up with kind of an idea of where are we now and how do we encapsulate that so you can communicate effectively to the community, to your neighbors, to other people in the school. And by no means is this a finished document because we still have work to do. We still have a couple of meetings left. But this is really just a summation of those 12 meetings to date and where we went. So I'll just go over a really broad brush because I know some of you probably have looked at this in granular detail. I know we've got a lot of really great comments and feedback from a lot of you on this, and that made it better. So just really quick here, and I'll just point at the top here, but you have it in front of you so you can look at it in more detail. There's really 2 different scripts that are actually about 95% the same. The big difference really is this bottom right-hand corner on the front right page. So that's the big differentiator. I think as we move forward and refine this towards the end, we'll look at an opportunity just to, how can we condense it all into one document? So we have all that information available in one document. At a high level, this really top paragraph just talks at a very summary perspective of what is the long range facility planning meeting, planning committee, how did it come to be? What are the guiding principles that were developed early on in the process? Here, those first 3 check marks there. And we have read those aloud earlier, which that was great, Scott. I love how you facilitated that. And then we moved into the next paragraph, which really talks about the Awesome Grant at, again, a very high level. There's more detail associated with that, but it really lets people know that there's a state match that's available to Silver Falls School District if and when a bond is passed. And so that's a $4 million state match. The 3 overarching kind of targets that we looked at is build a new Silverton Middle School with some renovation of the gymnasium, the existing gymnasium, preserve and repair capital assets, and then ensure accessibility for all. So those are kind of the 3 large buckets, if you will, and there's, again, a lot more granular detail associated with each one of those. The total needs throughout the district, again, this goes back to just all the great work this committee's done over the last year and a half, and just kind of summarize that and gave a little bit of an anecdote of just an average age of the facilities. If you remember a couple meetings back, we talked about the average age of a building at Silver Falls School District. This really kind of talks about that at some level. And then the bond amounts. So you see the P1, the P2, and the P3, those are the priority bond scenarios. And so at a baseline, the P1 was that $64.2 million bond with a $4 million awesome state match. And that really, at a baseline, was the middle school and some very select improvements at the other facilities. These are additive. So the P2 is P1 plus P2. P3 is P1 plus P2 plus P3. And then if you remember, we also talked about a potential P4, which is as of yet defined. The only thing that we know that P4 really is P1 plus P2 plus P3. And then there's an extra dollar amount associated with that. So that's that $130 million that we ran the scenario from Piper Sandler to just get a sense for what that would look like. This diagram in the lower right-hand corner, if you remember that really great presentation that Lauren pulled together from Piper Sandler that really talked about the different bond structures, but started at the baseline of your existing general obligation bond amounts from really the Silverton High School bond and kind of where those start tapering off. And you see it's been pretty level there at $2 for quite some time, and will remain so because of just good fiscal responsibility there. If we go to the next page here, let's see here. Oh, I got to point that way. As we go to the next slide, please.
It's not working for you.
No.
Oh my
wait, or wait. Maybe
It
it's
drives me crazy when the clicker doesn't work. It really does.
Yeah.
So that total is over the second phase of the high school to refinance. Is that the way I understand that?
There's refinance.
Oh,
Finance of 2020 still has over the next year plus bond structure. So still paying.
Basically, like in 2013, brought this up.
Yeah, say, okay,
That's them out. No, I mean, those things.
Yeah, if you go to the next slide, Scott. And while
Yeah.
we're doing that, if you look
Next
at the
slide,
other script, this lower right-hand corner here, that again is that big differentiator between the two. And that just runs a few different scenarios from the Piper Sandler. If you remember, those were just very basic 60, 70, 80, and then that $130 million amount. And really gives you an idea of what those could be for a home that has an assessed value of $250,000. So if you remember, we talked about what does that mean to my specific home, my specific property? What do I tell my neighbors? That's just kind of a way to try and relate and correlate a little bit. There was the target levy of 325, and then there's the 20-year combined level levy there. And then that last column, the tax rate through the life of the general obligation bond, those are just notes to when those are projected to drop. And then that 30-year combined levy, if you remember, the $130 million with a 30-year levy there. And that gives you a sense for the upfront yearly tax increase for a $250,000 home assessed value. Again, the assessed value is approximately 63% of the market value. So if you look at Redfin or Zillow or something, your assessed value is give or take on average, is kind of how that rolls.
Sorry. So the assessed value, when somebody purchases a home, is that home the assessed value? That is the purchase price of the home also the assessed value, or?
It could be, but it really depends. I mean, that's really the market value. The assessed value is what you get from the county,
Okay, thank you.
right? And what you pay your taxes on.
So that home that you purchased for, say, $500,000 would still probably be assessed at 63%.
Approximately,
Okay.
on average, based on just kind of what the statistics are in the county.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. On the inside there, the insert, this is really kind of the meat of the K-8 facility upgrades and the high school upgrades. And again, as a reminder, P1 is that baseline, P2 is the additive, and P3 is the other additive. P4 has not been identified in here. These, just so you know, none of this doesn't take into consideration just yet anything that we've heard during the K-8 listening sessions. This is just a point in time as we wrapped up towards the end of last year. So this was those needs that were identified, just for kind of some of those maintenance needs there. Again, I won't go into a whole lot of detail on each one of those, but these are just as an organizational tool. These are based on the age of the facility. So Prattam being 1928, you can see there in the upper left-hand corner, Silverton High School, 2002. So just graphically, what's the age of the facility relative to the other facilities. Go to the next slide, please. And then the back, of course, is the middle school, which is that P1, again, that baseline. And if you remember in our long-range facility planning meeting, I want to say it was 8 or something like that, we really looked at the program of that middle school and the needs for the middle school, and then how can we potentially phase it on site. And so this is just, again, at a high level, how it could be phased on site. And just kind of give a sense for that there. There's, again, program of new construction, very, very basic and generic site improvements associated with that. And then what is a rough ballpark of budget, if you will, of the cost for replacement. And then there at the bottom, Ray had that really great insight, I think, maybe a few months before we ended, about just the history of the Schlater Street. And it's just kind of a way to tie back to the legacy of the Schlater Street, the Schlater campus. And what was that named after? And that was kind of a fun little, anecdote there. And I think just relaying it back to some human elements is a good thing.
I have to give most of the credit to a local historian, Norman English. He just jumped right in and said, oh, here it is.
Yeah, so that's really great. So again, this is all very high level. I'd encourage if you haven't had a chance to review it in detail, we will look at it over in our small group activities as well a little bit. So, so yes, that's kind of where we're at the moment. Anything you want to add to that, Scott, or anybody? Speaking of small group exercises, so we're going to break off, and actually this is perfect because the room is a really great room for small group activities. We've got 3 small groups. We've got group 1. Group 2 is where the old research station is over here, kind of in the middle. And then group 3 is all the way in the back. And so I think what we'll do is maybe we'll just go around and kind of tick off. And if I can get Greg and Angela to lead one group a piece, and I'll lead one group. But really, we're here to listen mostly. So we'll go 1, 2, 3. Lauren's 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Wally. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Number 1. Great. So if you can go to your respective, and we'll.
Jonah, before we leave, how long is this activity? Is it 15 minutes and then a 5-minute share out for each, or how does this work?
That's a great question, Greg.
Because I can be a timekeeper.
I like it. I like it. So we've got about half an hour for this activity. Where are we at right now? Perfect. We're right on time. We got about half an hour. So what that is we'll have about 5 minutes of share out a piece. If we don't get, if we're under, that's okay. We can have more dialogue in the end. So 15 minutes of brainstorming. And our question, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So again, what you'll see over here is these boards blown up around here, so you can kind of reference those. The Long Range Facility Planning Committee has developed 4 different bond priority scenarios. Again, that 4th one is that $130 million bond. Which bond priority scenario is best for your community and why? Why, if you could articulate, why do you think that's the best for Silver Falls School District and for your community, your school? Kind of think of it from that filter, and just brainstorm as a small group. Please write down all of your thoughts, and then if we can in each group, if we can assign a scribe, so one person to write, and assign a presenter, one person to present for that 5 minutes. We'll come back here at about 6:50.
And I'll keep time, and I'll be hollering at folks about how much more time. We'll bring the scribe and the presenter back out to the front just because we're so spread out. So we'll bring our sheets and somebody, 1 or 2 folks who can present on this question.
Exactly. Yep. Does that make sense? Any questions on that?
Does the question make sense? We're just trying to, what would the community embrace? You've done a lot of great work and you got some recommendations. So chit chat in your small group, then we can have a discussion at the end.
Yes, Peter.
I don't know if there's a way to pull that online community in.
That's a good point. That's a tough gig.
Yeah.
My first thought is,
Okay. Yeah, maybe you can put her.
I can put her on FaceTime.
So we can get on
there you go, and just put her in a small group, yeah. And then she can share out in the discussion too.
Who's in the middle over there?
Listening, I thought it was very effective and productive. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share out the group, and if the speaker can come up and just share what their group had talked about, I will start with, only because it's right there, group 1. So who's the presenter for group 1?
Colin Scott.
Okay.
We didn't really have a lot of consensus, I guess, or we kind of talked more than we wrote anything down, but number one is basically a bond where people see the most value. And I think one of the things we talked about, and this was kind of more my opinion, if anybody in our group wants to share on top of that, is that in the past history, in the past bonds we tried to pass, you have a lot of people retirement age in this community that don't want to see a huge increase in their taxes. And that was a big topic the last time we tried to do this for the middle school, to where I think yellow scenario tends to appease them because it doesn't make a huge jump in their taxes, because they're looking at probably more of a 10-year to 15-year than a 30-year down the road. And I think we all felt that the green is great, but if you're going to do great, then if you're going to do green, you better be doing more than just remodeling everything. And you might be looking at like having to do a couple new buildings rather than just one new building for that kind of money.
And the green's the 30-year, $130 million.
And the reason we kind of came in the bottom line there to P3 yellow is that if you look at the middle line, it says we have to do enough for buy-in for all the K8s to be able to vote. And that was said that basically it's 60 million in either scenario. Once you got the middle school done, there's not going to be a whole lot left for the other schools.
Nice. Questions for group one before we move on? Nice. Let's just jump to group two. Over here in the corner, who wants to be the spokesperson for group two?
Eliza wants to.
Oh, sorry, Peter. Peter, sorry.
I don't want to, but you can. Okay. Well, I think most of us kind of agreed that we need to go big on a bond. And there's a couple of things that went through that thought process, that some come with challenges, but first, if we go small for a middle school and very little maintenance on the other schools, buy-in is one issue, but it's also just the longevity and keeping those schools functioning so they can serve the students. If we step it up a little bit more, we're still not covering all the needs. So it's kind of, we kind of, most of us thought a P4 option was the best for the longevity, but then the challenge is that's exactly, some people don't want a bond. If we pass a small bond just for the middle school, there's kind of that taste of a bond. And then when the schools that didn't get the needs addressed in this smaller bond, that's going to be very challenging to repass and get another bond, as we've seen historically here in Silverton. So kind of the consensus that I thought we got out of most people was go big and get it done and do it right to the best of our ability. It doesn't still accomplish everything, but it gets it at least on a track that they'll last. And then there was some concern that, and I brought it up, Central Howell is just, it's in just a horrible location right now with its proximity to that road and the increased traffic. And then one thing I brought up about the bridge that added that signal, it's really nice to have that signal there. The traffic flow is increased and better flow through, but also the weight limit on that bridge is going to go up, and therefore semis can come straight down, and that's going to add increase.
Traffic temporary.
What?
Traffic.
I understand it's temporary, but eventually when it becomes a mile-long backup there, but semi trucks and everything and increased traffic are going to be coming down Silverton Road. So again, I'm thinking out again 20, 30. If we're going to do P4, that's a 30-year commitment. 30 years. That's quite a bit of time and growth between Silverton and Salem. So that was just kind of what I brought up. But I think the consensus again was to go big, but it comes with challenges.
Excellent. Questions for group two before we move on?
Just one quick question related to that. We were just, Lori McLaughlin was on that meeting and she mentioned that you might have said that the leak or the septic field for Central Howell goes across, is on the other side of the road.
No.
We were just wondering if there's like room to build on that property because of his concerns with the road. Or if
It's a pretty small site.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
So is your P4 involved replacing Central Hall, involved another?
No, it was just
school?
one of the things that was brought up. It was on our list, I think, that the traffic, that's why.
I
brought
think
that
the
up.
point is to go ahead and try and get as much repair done as possible when we know that there's $175 million price tag currently.
But we're gonna have to face the fact that some of these buildings maybe don't justify repair.
Well, and then that wasn't part of our discussion. That was just, that's on our list and brought up. It's some things to consider. But the concept again is we have a huge list of things to repair. And if we don't repair them, 30 years down the road, 20 years down the road, things are not going to be in very good shape. And we're gonna be right back into the same situation with deferred maintenance and failing roofs or the roofs hopefully all be replaced, sorry. But,
Right.
other failing parts of the system. And so again, go big.
Excellent. Good work. Nice to know. Okay, let's finish it up with group 3. Who would like to share out for group 3?
I was halfway elected.
Okay.
And I'm welcome anyone to jump in and give their 2 cents worth. So one of the things, we chatted a bit about our different perspectives, and one of the things that came up, we kind of did an informal poll, and I grant that we're all in that 30 to 60-year-old age group that's voting males in the county. But the reality is, we had an interesting comment that 3.5 of us out of 5 said we would prefer to vote for a bond that would really be focused primarily on the middle school. Something that was a very fixed commodity that we'd know what we were getting. We also felt that there needed to be some way of addressing a measure to keep the other buildings functional. But for the actual big bond, perhaps almost a bond that would be only on that building. And maybe that would just develop a sense of trust that we needed to generate some sort of a bond to do repairs, we might actually succeed with that. And it'd be a small bond that would seem like a lot less of a hit to the pocketbook.
So you go on a smaller bond for a middle
Like a
school
$56 million bond.
to build trust to get one
To
down the
do a
road.
second bond, maybe not 20 years away, but maybe, like say, you wanted to float a $20 million bond, you might be able to, they say, oh, we did exactly what we said. Let's,
Very targeted, very clear.
yeah.
But I mean, the middle school would have to be at least a $45 million
Well,
bond.
that's why I said, we were talking about
Okay,
being
I'm just-
56 million,
Okay,
yeah.
And then doing another bond, like.
A separate bond,
quickly?
probably down the road once the middle school is built.
A lot of the issues the community has is if you do $130 million bond, it gets muddy on what's going where. So did Victor Point get a new building? No, they already have it covered. But you can't describe everything in a bond or you'll have a 500-page document to vote on. Right? So we thought that by putting too much in a bond, that's happened in the past, and all of a sudden then you lose all your voters.
Yeah, I think what was interesting was you saw our group. We usually don't agree on a whole lot. But we came together thinking that this, for the most part, not all of us, but the majority of this stuff, this was a reasonable way forward, because the 64 that Alan brought up, then that outlying schools, it's almost like a slap in the face. You're just giving peanuts. 90, then you have people saying, oh, why are we spending that much money on these old buildings? And when I was at the View Creek outreach meeting, and well, I said that it would be similar to other places, a lot of it, the outlying schools, and I shouldn't say most of View Creek, because, but it's kind of just leave us alone out there. And not to say that, oh, okay, leave us alone, you get nothing. But if you say, we need a new middle school, and you tell them that, and you can send that message
to the whole community. Yeah, I think 56, if it's just focused on it, is a way to get all sides all on the same page.
So I have a question on that real quick.
I'd just like to add a point that the thing that really struck me was, I'd say we had a fairly broad spectrum of political or school-based views on this subject. And the opposites came together on what they would agree to vote for.
Say that again.
So there are people in the group that are very clear about what they do not want happening in the district. Or, I don't know exactly, we sort of have opposite perspectives on how the district could progress, but we agreed that we would vote for this, for a focus bond just for the middle school.
So I was gonna ask, that kind of was going into my question, then is based on your guys' discussion, then I think that what Alan said is 100% true. So all of a sudden you have all these different communities. That's our biggest fight right now in this district. It's an us versus them and a you versus me, and when we get, so if you do that and you end up giving more to Scotts Mills than you do to Creek because it needs more repair, and you give more to this and that, are you gonna have groups saying, well, how come they get 5 million and we only get 3 to fix what we want now? So
That's the money.
then if you go to 80 and you fix a middle school, because we know that's the biggest need, you then take the rest, so we had this discussion, you take the rest and say, okay, every other K-8 gets X amount, same amount for every one of those buildings to do what you can do to those, to make sure that everybody's getting an equal amount. Because that, I guess that's just a question I'm asking, is if you do the 80 million, which everybody else kind of said, you're right both ways. Like Brett brought up with ours, right? So if you go strictly middle school, none of the KH are going to buy in and vote for it because they don't care. They don't have kids.
Well,
So why would they vote for
So
it?
you rural parents
So-
that were in that group think that people will vote for just the middle school?
I think it's an easier sell because it's focused and you can explain it. If you spread money around across the districts, it gets very unfocused. You can't, it's very difficult to explain. Also, you got to remember that most of the voters don't have kids involved in school.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking that a little bit, like the idea that we need to get voter buy-in, not necessarily school parent buy-in.
Right.
Which a lower bond would operate that way. But if we were if we really were to throw around this idea of going backwards to a smaller bond, we would also have to have in there some kind of language about we are next working on our rural school needs. There has to be something, because of what happened with the high school.
You can't say rural, you have to say K-8. Because Mark Twain and Russ Cross have needs as well. You get a middle school.
You're right.
So it has to be every other school.
So, yes, thank you. But I just, what I'm saying is you don't want to just try to pass a bond for that. And then 5 years or 10 years later, or 2 years later, start trying to pass bonds for these other things. And in the meantime, maybe the district could start telling us where they would get the money for the things that are on this larger bond that are needed. Or where they can't get them from.
No, there's no denying that all those schools need some budget for that stuff. I'm saying this as a guy who was voting for 90 to 130 million bond, but I was voting that thinking that would be maybe possibly 2 new buildings. I think it's a hard sell for 90 million and you get 1 new school.
And I'm not saying that I disagree with your guys' idea of only a middle school. I originally, when we first started this, I thought that was the best scenario. Let's get the middle school dealt with. We should be working on getting that bond passed now, while the long-range facility planning committee is figuring out what's the long-term goal of all of the other K-8 schools. Because and I'm not saying I disagree with that. I'm just saying as a question, like, so if one, would we get that voted through by the K-8s essentially getting nothing and still having deferred maintenance is probably not going to get done? Or are we going to be better off to do the 80? But if you do the 80, are you going to have the infighting? Well, why do they get 5? We get 3. So I'm just saying it's kind of, there's 2 different scenarios.
To be the devil's advocate, let's say we decide to go for an 80 or a $64 million bond and it fails. We're still going to have to keep the structures functional as they are currently. and we won't have any progress. So if you're kind of unclear about what the bond is going to buy, what do you want us to do? Vote for the one that's very clear or the one that's not so clear?
This bond's gonna be very difficult to pass anyway. So you need a very clear messaging. And again, most of the voters don't have kids involved in school.
And I think that's good to remember. The one thing that I struggle with is I think part of this K-8 process and part of this is trying to build trust. And when I think about building trust, I have a hard time thinking that floating a bond that just does the middle school helps build any trust with the K-8 community. Because I disagree with you a little bit, Colin, on our biggest issue. I don't think our biggest issue is infighting among all the schools. I think an evergreen voter would be okay with a Butte Creek school getting more money than them because just the size of the school. I think the issue is what we've talked about before, the long history of at least the perception and sometimes the reality of the district doing things and the board doing things and not following through or not being clear or not promising on what they delivered. And so for us to go for just a middle school, I think it would say, if we didn't do it exactly right, it would say, we don't care about you. And even if it passed, I would struggle with that. And I get being super clear, and we have to be super clear with whatever we do, but how does that gain trust that we're all working together for something good if we're just going for the middle school?
I think that also speaks a little to what I've heard a few times tonight about people wanting to, like, the idea that the rural schools are like, just leave me alone, hands off. The rural schools, not necessarily the in-town K-8s, but I mean, I was sitting at the Butte Creek listening session and I was looking around thinking, here we are under a covered play structure, looking at a gorgeous fresh playground with like roofs and fresh renovation in half of our building from the seismic upgrade that we had a few years ago. And it's a little harder for families there to know what else they might need. I mean, I can assure you they need air conditioning, but I don't know, beyond that they would necessarily be needing more than a smaller school that's in heavier disrepair.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things about the leave me alone attitude is not related to facilities necessarily, it's related to culture. And so as somebody at one of them, I'm starting to mix them up. I remember when I was teaching, and like by the third period, I was teaching the same US history class. I'm like, I have no idea what I said or what I heard. But in one of the listening sessions, somebody explained it pretty well. They said, we want, actually, I think we've heard it in every single one. We need new bathrooms, new faucets, new toilet. I mean, it's all old and just patched together, duct tape, everything. Say, I want a new bathroom, but if you give me the choice between, taking away my culture and having me consolidate or go somewhere else, or the bathroom, I'll just deal with the bathroom and I'll take my culture. So I mean, to me, that encapsulates that. They do want things. They want a covered play area. I think Josh, I don't know if you brought it up already, but Josh was looking at letters from 1997, 98, where they were asking for, guess what? Covered play areas back in 97, 98. And so they want stuff, but they want to be left alone in terms of being forced to be like other people and things
Well, and
like
I think
that.
that
The only reason I said that is because I heard that out of the Scotts Mills listening session, that basically a parent stood up and said, if I vote for all this, why can't I just pass a bond and vote it and pay for my school?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a legit, I mean, it's just a local, they would love to just vote for taxes in Scotts Mills to pay for their school. I mean, I don't think that's a
That's all I'm
selfish.
saying. I guess if you pass this number, these people that are paying these taxes look at what they're paying and they go, wait a minute, I'm paying this amount and my school got this. I'm just, and I'm not saying I think that's gonna happen. I'm just saying, that could be a possibility for some voters to not want.
The reason, Colin, that guy asked that question because he said Scotts Mills has their own zip code, so they want to vote separate. And it's true, Scotts Mills is the only school with its own zip code outside of Silverton, but that's a different story. So that's where it came from, is that guy's legitimate question was, can we have our own bond because we have our own zip code? So it was explained to him afterwards.
Well, I'm just saying, but that's kind of like,
I understand what you're
I mean, that might be some of that thinking.
And I brought this up towards the end, and I might be being overly pessimistic, but again, looking out 20 to 30 years, some of these schools, if they do not get some of this basic, I mean, faucets, bathrooms, porta potties can be put in pretty easy. I refer to them as blue saunas in the summertime, fire camp. But, some of these schools do not have enough space for modulars. So when the interior facility gets to a point where there's some type of failure in a system that causes the school to be no longer occupied, there is no place to put the modulars in a lot of these places. I mean, they can put them all across what limited field access they have, but if they really, and that's where I think the community wants to preserve that school and that facility, they have to, I mean, the community has to invest in it. I don't see how you're gonna get a middle school and then pass a bond later, because I think you're gonna have that same thing, the people that we paid for one before 10 years ago. It's gonna be a hard sell unless you're very, very upfront. I don't think that's possible to make a promise to say, we'll pass this one, then we'll try again for you in 5 or 10 years.
I mean, why not just say that with this bond, we're going to build a middle school and bring our schools into condition where they can last at least another 15 years? I mean, that
I would
seems to
hope
be
it-
about,
yeah,
it
20
depends on
years,
the
but-
volume of the bond.
But that's the bigger bond. That's not doing a $56 million bond or whatever you guys were saying. I
Yeah.
think that has to be the bigger bond to do that.
I'm pessimistic too, but it's for other reasons, because I understand Butte Creek needs a new bathroom, they need AC, a lot of schools. And I would love for that to happen. I just don't know if 90 million would pass. That's.
And never in a million years, but
I want to think about what's best for the kids. That is 90 million in getting these things.
No, I never thought I would want to put a bond in for 50, 60 million, and I think 120 sounds like it needs to be done. I mean,
Yeah,
that's,
no.
I think we can change some minds.
And me too. And if I can get convinced that you could actually change minds, that's one thing.
But I think here's the
But
bigger
that's
issue, we
it.
keep
I
bringing
like
it up,
the
but then we
thoughts
skate
and
over it,
ideas.
is that majority of the voters don't have kids in school. So you're gonna have to convince those people, because some of these ones that are going to the outreach meetings are going, so what happens if it doesn't pass? And Scott, answers it the best he can, but I've heard that, and I get the same question. So the people with kids in school are asking what happens if it doesn't pass, but the other, I think it was, at one time I thought somebody said 73% didn't have kids of the voters. It's a very high number. I may be off a few points, but it's a lot. So how do we convince those people? We have to convince not the people with kids in school that we need the money.
I know
Kids in
last,
school know that Brett has a school needs repair.
I know last time we actually talked, a few times ago, we talked about the demographics, but it was also what we thought made the other bonds not pass. So the question I really have is, we talk about ones that have kids in schools and not, but is that really what caused them to fail or pass, right? Because if it's really the outlying community cultures, and you can galvanize those communities, you can get a lot of people who don't have kids in school to vote, because they have legacy, they have history, that's clear that the community comes and supports the chili feeds and supports all those things. So we really have to look at the demographics and say, where's the voting population? Did they vote for it last time or not? And why? And if it really was the culture that allowed them not to vote, we can play on culture all day long. That's an emotional heartstring. So my point is, I don't know, to your question, I don't know if it's the guys with kids in school that'll allow it to pass, or the ones out of school. It might be other things that actually cause them to do it. And then you got to go for it. If we don't go for it, these schools are going to fall apart long-term. 30 years from now is not the same as 20 years before. So
Maybe I could move into the K-8 listening session overview and progress report, because I think it might answer some of your questions. And Alan, you bring up a good point, because I am asked that a lot. What happens if the bond doesn't pass? And my response is nothing. Nothing will happen. And so let your mind go down that rabbit hole. Because we have kids at a middle school who've been there 6 years, only meant to be there 2. That building is crumbling. And so that's sort of how I frame it. It's very unusual that a school district like Silver Falls, with the type of wealth in the community, would have buildings in this type of shape. It really is, and I would go out on a limb to say it's extraordinary. There's not another district quite like Silver Falls in Oregon. That is a fact. And all of those things that make Silver Falls so different is what makes it such a desirable place, in my opinion. And a lot of that we've found in our listening sessions, and I still consider myself fairly new here and very much in a learning role. And this discussion right here is just awesome. The diversity of thought that we have just around a bond to begin with, let alone the different amounts in each bond, is really something we're going to have to grapple with in the next few years. Just to get this out of the way up front, if we're talking about a bond, that is completely 100% the purview and the pleasure of the board. In my personal opinion, even though we have not spoken as a board about a bond per se, the soonest that we could even conceive of that ever happening to talk about would be the spring of 2023. So we may be looking at 5 years from now. The point is that we got to get started now. This process right here has taken 3 years, 3 superintendents, 2 architecture firms. We've already applied for a year extension, which was this past year. And then we just applied for another extension to be able to get these listening sessions done. So I think that it's all this is important to kind of keep in context, because the longer we wait, the higher inflation goes, the more expensive things get. And we still have this situation where we need a bond. And so I want to go over just for a little bit about the thinking around the KA listening sessions. I want to take you through how this began, the process we used to develop the listening session format, where we are now and where we're going to end. And so we'll be talking just about the K-8 issue. And where this all started was basically in the first meeting of the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee last fall. And this idea of, which was very new to me at the time, about this word consolidation, which I know has really, our community in Silver Falls has been grappling with this ever since the district was unified, and we were the last district in the state to actually bring everything together. So, and it's been a source that is just beyond sensitive. It is just a lightning rod, but it's something that I really feel we've had to hit head on and just start talking about these things and really getting a handle on it. And so in each one of those 12 meetings, this word would come up. And so by the time we got into the spring, I came back to you as a committee to say that it's time that we develop a process to finally put some of these questions to rest. Because along with the word consolidation, what also came up is, well, there's never been a formal process to ask our K-8 communities what they want. What do they want their future to look like? There is a ton of anecdotal evidence. I've met many people who said, yeah, we've done that before. Everything that I've seen, we don't have any evidence of that, and only anecdotal. So we wanted to go about a process to formalize that and come up with a final report, a findings report that could stand the test of time. And so I took that with me. I considered that a directive from the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee to go out and find out for you, and then to come back and report out in a formal way exactly what we found out relative to those questions, and then additional things that came up at those listening sessions that are pertinent to what would eventually lead to a bond. One of the things that I've learned, and I just want to start out with a couple of comments. The first thing is how much I do not know. That's the first thing. So to approach this type of a project with basically no background knowledge except for the year that I've spent in Silver Falls, to me, I think put me in a very unique situation to just be in a humble and learning mode. And I wanted to publicly thank Brett Davison for being with me every second of the way. We've spent hundreds of hours, both with the K work group leading up behind the scenes. And then for every listening session, we put in about 10 hours worth of prep. So just on the listening sessions alone, you're talking about 70 to 100 hours just in the prep that it took to go into the listening session, being totally prepared to ask the right questions and for the communities to actually genuinely feel like their voices were heard. I also think, and I didn't know this at the time, but our K-8 facilities are like monuments in their communities, in their school communities. And in some respects, this is the last thing that our K-8 communities are holding on to is this building that in some cases goes back 5 generations. So, you know, I've talked to individuals who have 5 generations in their families who've attended a K-8. That is absolutely extraordinary, which when you think about it, Silver Falls has only been around for 30 years. And here we have families talking about my grandfather and great-grandfather went to this school that we're at right now in the listening session. And so all those things kind of factored into the enormity and the monumental nature of this project. And I'll report out on it now, but just know I will be coming back to this committee in another month or so to give you the actual report itself. I also want to thank those long-range facilities planning committee members who are on the K-8 work group. And I'm going to forget, but Brett, of course, and Wally. Wally was the first member I called, and then Brett and Tom. And who else? Lisa Kenzie was on it. Eliza. Am I missing? Josh. Josh has been to a couple of listening sessions so far, and I want him to share his thoughts in a little bit. And so basically the way that this started, and I'm going to kind of walk you through a story. This timeline kind of tells a story, so you just have to bear with me on the bullet points. But back in May, I considered it a directive from the committee that we really need real answers on what do our K communities want their futures to look like, and that involves obviously this idea of consolidation. And then in June, we started putting together a work group. And we started, Brett and I started independently coming up with names that would be representative of stakeholders on this committee, and that we wanted to keep the number of the committee members between 20 and 25. Anytime you get larger than 20 and 25, it gets really difficult to get focused. So we ended up with 23 stakeholders. And we began extending personal invites to those individuals. And the first meeting we had was at the end of June. I think it was June 22nd. And we met at Pradham. And we hired Jerry Colonna from Colonna Education Services. Jerry is, in my opinion, the most respected administrator in the state of Oregon. His reputation is beyond reproach. And I really needed a facilitator of these meetings so that I could just focus on what was being said by the community. So that's really what Jerry's involvement has been, just a non-biased, just a facilitator that can come in and understands the dynamics of the room and how to ask, pose the right questions and make sure that we're giving space to elicit the right answers or the answers from the community. And we met twice. We met in June and in August 31st. And the charge of that work group was to design a process to go into each K-8 community and hold what we called a listening session at the time, but what we have renamed a listening and learning session. One of the things that came out during those meetings, because originally we were going to group the listening sessions by region in the district, but it became painfully clear, even after the first work group meeting, that we had to have 7 independent listening sessions. So we needed to also understand that we had a due date for, to wrap up this process on by December 31st, so that we were able to petition the state for an extension to that. And so really the deadline to get this process wrapped up, this 3-year process wrapped up, would be the end of February. So the board would be voting on a recommendation from the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee at the February board meeting. In November, so let me back up. We started the listening sessions in, let's see. Can you take care of that, Daniel? We started the listening sessions in September. We've gotten through 3 so far. Should have been 4, but we had a little issue with getting the tent set up at Silvercrest in a thunderstorm, and we didn't realize at the time, but the tent that was ordered did not come with sides to it. So that was an additional option that we were taking care of. And so we saved a backup date, and we'll have that at the end of October. But we have since been through Butte Creek, Scotts Mills, and Victor Point. After these listening sessions conclude at the end of October, Jerry has been taking in all of the information that we're gathering. Debbie has been taking copious notes, and he will hand over to me the first draft of the findings report by mid-November. I will take that report and I will, make sure it's formatted correctly. And then what we plan to do in early December is to take that report back to the K-8 work group to show them the findings of the process that they helped us develop. And for each work group member to sign off on that report that the integrity of it was true and correct. And so Tom and Eliza will be there in early December, and others, Josh, to listen to the report, the findings of the report, and at the end to sign off that it was true and correct. And then I can take that to the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee, make my formal report to you in late December. And then we will hold off on a meeting to be determined to see how much time the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee wants to kind of mull over the types of things that were shared. Because one of the things that I'll talk about in a minute is out of these listening sessions, certain things have come up that are not on these documents, these beautiful documents. And so if we're going to put in all this effort to go into K-8 communities and listen to what they want their future to look like, we need to be able to go back to them to say, we've really listened and this is how we've used your input. So there will be some grappling with this as a group in terms of what adjustments we need to make to this plan before it goes to recommended to the board. And again, in February, we hope to have this wrapped up. So right now, I'm going to take you through what the listening session format looked like. That's a picture there of Victor Point. I would say, and this is a guess, but I think it's a pretty good guess, that 95% of the students at Victor Point were represented in that meeting. It was one of the most amazing meetings in education I've ever witnessed. It's not something I'll ever forget. And I would say the same thing for the Butte Creek listening and learning session and the Scotts Mills. Each one has been equally as powerful. And each community is so distinct from the other. You just cannot, you cannot group these communities together. They have distinct values. They have distinct wants and needs. And that is something that has become very, very apparent. We always start with outcomes at each one of our listening sessions. And what I want from the stakeholders that attend is that they clearly understand what our intentions are. So I'm not there to close their school. So that's really important that our K-8 communities understand that. Because at this point where I sit right now, I'm not interested in that. I'm still new, I'm learning about the district. I'm there to see what it is that they would like to see in their future, not I'm here to close their school. So I can only get there by saying I want them to understand my intentions if I actually come out and say what I'm here to do, but also what I'm here not to do. Also, one of the things that came up during the K-8 work group about process was that we need to give space for the community to vent about all of the difficult challenges that the current circumstances are posing. And I would say you can sort of take your pick along the socio-political spectrum, but a lot of that has to do with public schools. And until we talk about facilities, we got to first talk about what the other things are that might be preventing some of our stakeholders from wanting to share. We need to be able to give them the space to tell us their concerns first. Because if this is a document that stands the test of time, we need for that information to be in there also. Because one of the things I've also learned since being here, and I think it goes back to something Brett told me early on, was everything that happens in Silver Falls is tied back to a facility. And I think that's true. Everything that goes on in Silver Falls, you can tie it directly back to a facility or a facility issue, or somebody got something and somebody didn't get something, or an us versus them. It's all centered around the facilities issues. And again, it lets us know how monumental this work is as well. And also, we wanted the community to leave feeling like they were really heard. And the way that, at least in my mind, we do that is by going back to them and showing them exactly how we use the input of each community as well. And so the next step in the process was we're just really upfront with information around the general obligation bonds information. It's really basic stuff. But for somebody who's not used to it, who haven't been on a long-range facilities planning committee, bonds are not intuitive necessarily. So there's certain vocabulary that we want to get out of the way, and Steve does a great job with that. And that's also something we learned after the Scotts Mills listening session. We heard from several individuals that you need to give the information up front on the bond so we at least know about that. And so we're learning as we go as well. We also point them to the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee web page on our district website. That's got a mountain of information, as you know. And then we also point out at each K-8 all the different upgrades that the district has participated in. And we also point out, the good work of the community as well, because I think that's one of the special things about Silver Falls is the amount of resources that have come from each community to try to improve their schools as well. Then I tie it all the way back to the strategic plan, and that's why this committee is here now. This committee came out of the strategic plan, and goal number 3 is, and I think the exact wording is, we want our schools to represent the excellence in education in Silver Falls or something like that. I think, in my humble opinion, a better way to represent that is that our facilities reflect our love and respect for our students, because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want our facilities to respect how much or to represent how much we love our students and respect our students' education. And so it all goes back to this 3rd goal in the strategic plan. There are 3 goals, but the most important one for us right now is the 3rd goal, and that's facilities. And it starts with coming up with a committee and then a plan, and then of course leading to what would hopefully be a bond, passing that bond, and then actually starting on some new construction and then improvements. And then giving them some background info, just how the strategic plan started and everything that I just mentioned, and that there's pretty much unanimous agreement that we need a new middle school. I haven't met one stakeholder that disagrees with that statement. Everybody understands that that's what we need. That we have a long-range facilities planning committee, but that also this wouldn't be the idea of having a super-sized middle school. Because what we found is that there is some nervousness in our K-8 communities that we're going to build this behemoth middle school and send all the K-8 middle schoolers in town. And that is not the case either. Again, that goes back to what our intentions are with why we're at the listening sessions to begin with. And then the questions that keep coming up in the 12 meetings around improvements to each K-8 facility, or do we get into this idea of consolidation for a larger K-8 in what would be the same region of the district? For example, with Butte Creek, the way we posed the question was to consolidate Butte Creek and Scotts Mills and have one larger new facility in that same region. It would be the same out here, out west with Central Howell, Prattham, and Evergreen, a larger K-8 that would be built in the same general region. You all know, because you've seen the scenarios of how much that would cost. We've gone through that as a committee. We went through those numbers actually with the K-8 work group too. And so we've been open with that as well. And so then we get into part one, and this is where the whole meat of the listening session starts with tell us about your concerns locally, globally, and other concerns. We spent about 40 minutes on that. Just us taking notes, us listening, Jerry facilitating. And then we get into the questions that we really want answers to. And I put a for example, but that actually up there, those 2 bullet points are the exact questions that we ask. And we do give a little bit of time for them to talk about that. Now, I do have to say that as a superintendent, getting up and talking to, say, Victor Point, all 100 or so people who were there, I can tell you that I pretty much already knew what the answer was going to be. But what keeps coming up in the long range facilities planning committees is we've never asked them. So I think everybody in this room would agree with me that you could pretty much make an educated guess on what you knew those answers would be. And we have not been proven wrong, but this is actually going to a listening session and asking the question formally and then documenting exactly what the reasons are. So it wasn't just no, but we wanted the stakeholders to tell us why. And we have that documented, that will go in the final report as well. The second bullet point on reconfiguration, that came from working with Kevin Palmer at Butte Creek, who had been through a school closure with Monitor. And I guess there's been some history of some worry about reconfiguring, which means you may take a K-8, make it into a K-5. So that's really what reconfiguration means. So we decided to add that in for the listening session as well while we're on that topic. And so that really, in that 40 minutes really is to capture those questions there. And plus, what do you want your future to look like? And so if we got the answers there, then we'd move right into what would you like your future to look like? And then we just start taking in all the information that people had to share about why and what they'd like to see in their facility's future or what they want for their kids. And so this slide is about what we've learned so far. And so I just came up with 4 main points, and Brett, feel free to jump in. But I think these 4 points do a pretty good job of what we've extracted so far in terms of the community's voices. The first is repeatedly, I stay until the last question is answered. So the listening session ends at 8:30, but I was at Victor Point until 9:45. I was with the last couple that were there. In each instance, and I expect this to happen at Prattam on Thursday, is that we've never had anything like this process before. The district has never genuinely asked us what we want. And that's always followed with, we're so used to them telling us what we get, not being asked what it is that we want. So that was the first thing. There's a strong turnout and a very high proportional representation of the student body. So again, at Victor Point, I would say it was definitely in the mid-90s, 95% representation. Scotts Mills was so unique because it was light inside the tent, but people were spread out all over. So many people attended. So I would hazard to guess, I'd say it's probably 80%. The cows were mooing in the background. It was just awesome. It really was. It was just a tremendous night. So far, we've received no evidence that supporting consolidation of K-8 schools into larger, newer K-8 facilities. Even the emails that I've received after of people who are not comfortable sharing, I've not received any evidence there. Some of the feedback we got was to pass out 3x5 cards. We'll do this at Prattam. Again, we're trying to get better with each one. To even go an additional step to try to gather what the truth is if people aren't comfortable emailing that to me. And then the fourth was that at least it's occurring to us that there's a growing understanding that we are a school district and that because we are a unified school district, we must operate as such. So we did have a comment in Scotts Mills of a gentleman, I thought it was a great question. If we're in our zone zip code, can we have our own bond for our own school? And those are good questions, because that to me would sound logical if I wasn't working in the education field, that why couldn't we do that? But I think there is a general understanding. The other thing I think is I haven't found a stakeholder yet in Silver Falls that wouldn't bend over backwards for every student in this district. I think people just have different ideas about how they'd like to get there. But I think everybody supports a middle school. I do think that archaic communities support that idea, but I also think, and again, I'm still learning, that if a bond gets passed, it's going to run through the K-8 communities. I really believe that. I honestly, it's just becoming clear to me that we have to be able to build in something for each one of our K-8s that's meaningful for them, so they can see the value in the fact that we are one school district. And of course, you know, the voters in the K-8 community needs to see what it is that they're voting on and what it is that they're paying for. That's come up as well. So having said that, why don't I want to go here to encourage you to attend at least one of the listening sessions coming up. We have Pradham, Central Howe, Evergreen, and Silvercrest. Because I think it will give you a whole different flavor for you to actually be there and listen. If not, that's okay. But I think for the purposes of the work here, that it is very important. This is a monumental effort to finally put to rest some of these questions that have been buggering the Silver Falls community for decades. That it's important that you participate in at least one of them if you're able to make it. Those are the dates there.
Same time.
They're all at the same time, 6:30 to 8:30. And we will be at Pradham this Thursday. And I'll go back a slide, because what I'd really like to do is for our long range facilities planning committee members who are here right now, if they could share some thoughts, either from their experience on the K-8 work group and what they saw at the listening sessions, or if you just attended a listening session, if you could tell us a little bit about your experience and your perspective. And Tom, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you've been a part of this work since the get-go. I think, in fact, Tom, you might have been the first person I even started talking to about this concept of developing a process to answer these questions. And maybe we'll start with you.
I wanted to ask a question before in case I left it up. Are the notes from those meetings somewhere where you can find them?
They will be. We're shaping them up right now, and we will be posting those. Yep. And all of them verbatim will be posted in the final report. So we're not changing anything.
So nothing was recorded?
Nothing was recorded. And it wasn't recorded because it was a listening session, and we wanted to make sure we were providing a space that was safe for people to share what was on their mind. And that's the reason why we went with the minutes that Debbie was there to take.
It's a very good blocking out a word, but opportunity to get information. And obviously, Victor Point, and it sounds like Butte Creek had a very good turnout. I was kind of hoping, from what I've heard, is that the conversation has kind of opened more with the perspective of we have no intent to close schools. And I was kind of hoping that being that it was a listening session, so just saying, we want to know what your facility would be like. And I feel like saying it is our intention not to close schools is more leading the conversation, doesn't really lend itself to having a more open conversation. But, And unfortunately, I wasn't I was hoping to be able to go to the Victor Point meeting, but I had conflicts. But this summer, the meetings we had were, I thought, nice and nicely run. Jerry is a very good facilitator, and he's really had the opportunity to have some good communication.
Josh?
I was at Scotts Mills and Victor Point, and you know, I just want to talk about the listening sessions because I thought I got the most out of those. I was so impressed and encouraged by how much love and respect that the parents had towards the staff of this district, the principals, both Kristen, I'm saying that right, or is it Kirsten Jorgensen, and Jamie McCarty, and all the teachers. It was powerful. And I just hope it's like that in every school building. I don't have reason to think it's not. That left an impact. So we're doing something right. The people that I talked to, they came out expecting to hear something completely different than what they got. Most of them showed up thinking they're the ones supposed to be listening, not the other way around. So they were very surprised. One of the things that was pretty apparent to me was how different the cultures were between the different rural schools. And listening to Brett, and also how the other principals work, was, I think, the importance of the intra-district transfers that is an opportunity for kids. While we want to have everything kind of be the same between schools, there's most certainly different cultures. So if something wasn't working well at the middle school because it was too much, that they could be able to transfer to a different school that had something a little bit that would fit them better with the smaller class sizes, seemed to be an invaluable asset that we have that's unique to us in a lot of ways. The consolidation comment was funny because the same thing I keep hearing from Pradham and Central Howell parents, I heard the exact same thing from a Scotts Mills parent, was when Scott presented the question, what, so you can ship us into town? It was like, no, I mean, no. So that was a solid no, just like Scott said. And one of the things the parents said was that Scotts Mills was the heartbeat of that community. And just looking at the people that showed up, I think it's the only thing they have going in that town is that school. And one of the other things too is when we opened it up the floor to everybody in the committee or the group about share whatever you want about anything. I was really surprised by the lack of political stuff that popped up. It was more just focused on school buildings and their kids. That was also a complete surprise to me, and again, encouraging. So that's what I took away.
Liza?
Well, I really enjoyed the listening sessions, like the district and Debbie in particular brought these amazing meals, and I thought that it was a nice way to sort of open up and get to know people. Of course, we were all pre-seated like this, so if you didn't know the people around you and they knew the people to your sides, then you're eating by yourself, but that's kind of what happens in this community anyway. But it was a really nice addition, and Debbie made really great food. And
Second that.
there was a really strong group of engaged community members present at this. And yet I feel that they were not self-informed about the deferred maintenance needs in this district. And so when I went to the listening session at Butte Creek, I was really hoping to hear a little more information about why we would be having this conversation to begin with. And I felt like we spent like 40 minutes talking about bus routes and masks, which I think is a sign that there needs to be more of this. I mean, you're dedicating so many nights. I totally appreciate it. But clearly the community has some stuff they need to talk about like their personal concerns about what quarantine looks like or how closure happens and all of those things related to like current now politics issues. I have to agree though that I did hear a number of parents say, we don't want politics in the school. And I don't really think politics was the issue. It's more like people didn't know why they were there. I mean, I also had made calls out from the school inviting people to come to the meetings. And I let them know that this was a district listening session to talk to the school about what was happening in the building, but I don't know that they were all prepped for that. So if you're doing more of those calls out to other places, I could give you some advice about how to do that, or like good things to say out. But I also felt like you opened the meetings with, I am not here to consolidate your schools. I don't want to close any schools. I don't want to reconfigure any schools, which I agree with, you know, personally. But it kind of like, you say you don't want to do any of that, and then talk about a few things without really talking about the real reason why we might be considering the need to merge buildings. And then people, you ask them like, do you want to consolidate schools? And no one says anything. And so you're just like, can I just at least get one answer? And they said no, which we all would expect. And then at the end of it, we got a little bit more feedback about facilities concerns at Butte Creek, but primarily I felt like it wasn't really a facilities focused meeting. So I think that what this leads to is, I think that our entire district, not just schools, but the whole community, needs to understand how much is needed at these buildings. That's my advice. And I enjoy being involved. And if I had originally planned to attend all 7 listening sessions, because I'm curious also about what like the different school communities are like, and what their priorities are. But then I heard that certain people were invited to them, and I haven't heard anything about that. So I didn't want to like insert myself into meetings. Now I see that you're people to join them again. So
We've always publicized this as open meetings, so everybody's welcome. Wally?
Yeah, I've not attended a listening session yet. That's kind of the same boat as Eliza. I didn't want to insert myself into there. I wanted the community to be willing to speak. The K work group, though, I think was outstanding. The people I talked to were really pleased. They were invited to attend. They were engaged, and I think they felt good about being part of that process and getting this thing moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, right from the get-go, I've been excited about this process because I feel like I have connections to lots of different areas and people because of my grandparents and parents, and being in K-8 land myself with my kids, and then being at Evergreen, and now being at the middle school. And so I enjoy this part, and I feel better about where we are right now in terms of building trust than I have in a long time, because of the time that we've invested in just listening to what people want and not trying to go out and change people, but listen to their concerns and seek to understand. And that's why I get back to the trust thing about a bond. I'm really worried if we go one direction, because we're spending all this time and we're hearing like passionate responses from K-8 land about what they want, and we're building trust. And I feel like if we don't deliver on some of those things, we're going to lose that momentum. Because if we come back and say, we came out, we listened to you, we understand that you want this, this, and this, and then we come out with a bond that's just for the middle school, and we say, well, we promise in 10 years we'll come back and deal with your stuff, I think we lose it. I think we lose it. I feel a little weird going out to those sessions, but not that I don't. I mean, I know a lot of people out there and I love it. It's awesome. But then they're like, why is the middle school principal here? Is he wanting a big school? And so I start out by saying, no, I don't want a mega middle school. Do you really want 1,000 12 and 13-year-olds in one building? No, nobody wants that. And so I try to put them at ease in that area. And then just talk about my perspective, and then I feel like I want to be a bridge, because I feel like I can talk to the people that I know in K-8 land and say, no, that's not what in town is like. Okay, you have some misconceptions about that. And I can turn around and talk to the people, my friends that are in town, and say, no, that's not what K-8 land is like. And that's not what they value. And I think we all just need to do more of that. And so I mean, if you can go, because they're very unique. And even from Eliza, from Butte Creek to we got better with each one and felt like we interacted more and got more on target. Each one has been really, really good, and we're getting better at kind of drawing out and zeroing in on the facility stuff. But I think through this kind of process, we can just gain some trust with each other, build on that momentum a little bit. And yeah, the nitty gritty of the money and all that stuff is something we need to hash out. But I really feel like we need to do enough in the K-8s that they say, okay, they came out, they listened to us, and they followed through. And so now we want to invest in everybody. And I do feel like, I don't know who said it, but I think deep down, from what I'm hearing from people, they want to help out. They want to invest. K-8 people in K-8 land want to help the kids in the middle school by building a better middle school. They just need to trust us first to be able to do that. And I think we could get there. So
The first listening session was at Butte Creek. We kind of felt like a football team in the first preseason game, didn't we, Brett? Because we didn't really know what to expect. My biggest nightmare was, okay, we're going to plan this whole thing and no one's going to show up. Like, that was seriously a nightmare that I was having. Not that Butte Creek doesn't care. It's just, did we not do enough to get people to turn out? So each one we've gotten better. I just want to give Steve Nielsen a chance to share his feeling on. You've been with us through the whole thing, Steve.
Yeah, I'm glad Brett added what he just said about each session. We have a debrief, Scott, Jerry, Brett, and I about the meeting and plan for the next one. We just had one today. So we take the feedback that we get and our own observations, and we've kind of tweaked some order of operations and, a little more upfront, like Eliza talked about, what we didn't see, Butte Creek about, talking a little more about the facilities up front in the bond, but also allowed plenty of sharing both on just in general and then in the facilities. But I think the tweaks have worked really well. And I think, Josh was at number 2 and number 3. So I think he saw the benefit of that, but it's just been very, very informative. And I would agree, if you can make it to one of the remaining 4, it's extremely helpful. And I found them all to be, I feel, given the state of the world the last 18 months, both politically and from the pandemic perspective, it was amazingly positive and inspiring, to be quite honest. So there's a lot of good out there. So and the conversation here tonight has been very, very, very good. So thank you.
I just have, a concern possibly that, have you gotten any pushback that the in-town schools haven't been reached out to? Because I don't want to have, I guess that's a concern, that why aren't you talking to us?
Well, I think the thing that we talked about early on was that all the questions have surrounded the K-8 communities. And so that's really the questions that we set out to answer. And that came up at a couple different times, but in my estimation, it would take the focus off what we were actually trying to get answers to. And that was going back to the consolidation piece.
I'll push. I think we need to have those meetings.
And if we need to, then that's going to be a separate process.
Because I think when you're talking about a district of schools or a school district,
Yeah.
we're promoting the K-8 versus the K-5, K-town. It's got to go away.
Yeah. And that's
try to limit that.
That's a good point. And maybe we need to think about an additional process to be able to do that.
Actually, it would probably be very helpful to include the middle school too, truly, because in the end, the number one thing we all agree on is the middle school needs a love handle.
Yeah, for sure.
And getting feedback from the people that go there would probably be very valuable about what we want in a new structure.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Those are all really good points.
Was there any discussion or questions about the element of time? You can understand how the culture developed and remained, if you will,
some cases 5 generations. Did anybody voice an opinion as to where they think we might be 20 years from now? Or even 10, because what I'm thinking about is, you know, maybe this committee's recommendation to the board is, it looks like these rural schools, these K-8 schools, communities are going to be there for several years, quite a few years, in fact. And so maybe the planning needs to be done with that in mind rather than a 2 or 3 year fix. And so I guess my question is, with respect to the K-8 listening sessions, was there any discussion to speak of about, you know, 20 years from now, probably we may have to close or do something?
Yeah, you said when you were asking people what they wanted to see in their
Mhm.
facility, we're thinking for the next, I think you said 20 years, is that what, or 10? I'm trying to remember. So you did mention that.
I think you said that, like, that this is the listening sessions were an offshoot of the long-range facility planning, and that we have a 10-year plan that we're working on. And he didn't really, at least at our meeting, bring up this at all. But, I mean, he showed it to us, but he didn't discuss it. I mean, it's a very detailed thing. It takes a lot of work. But then discuss that what we've recognized is that we actually need to think beyond 10 years and sort of like at least the length of what a bond might look like. You did use the word bond a couple times in that meeting.
Yeah, and what we learned coming out of that meeting is that we have to address the bond right up front in the listening session to give them that information. That's one of the things we learned after the first one.
For those of us who haven't been to the session, I had some hearsay. My gut impression was that the majority of the session so far has been mostly talking about immediate problems with schools reopening and all the difficulties, but I don't know what the actual context was.
That happened at Deep Creek, but not the other two.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we learned a lot from the Butte Creek one. I would say that the dynamic at Scotts Mills and Victor Point was completely different. Mostly off of what we learned. But there were so many unanswered questions that we had going into it. That, you know, one of the K-8s had to be the first one. And
I mean, I think that's the right facility
Yeah.
to start with. For
Yeah,
starting.
that's
It's
what we
the most
thought.
developed. You
Yeah,
know?
that's what we thought. Having said that, we're trying to keep the time. We started 10 minutes late about, and I think we have one wrap-up activity, Jonah, and we can do that, and then we're done for the evening. Thank you all for your comments.
Great. Really great feedback, everybody, and just great to hear the perspective on those K-8s. So our last activity is a really quick one. It's not a small group activity. We want to respect everybody's schedule here. So if you remember, Scott, can you go to that next slide, please? If you remember at our last meeting, we did a temperature check on just kind of those bond scenarios and what we think about and what would the community support as far as that, because that kind of helps shape that long-range facility plan a little bit. And then we talked about it today a little bit in these group sessions. And then we heard some feedback from the K-8 community. So what we really like to do at this point is to take another temperature check, and we'll do this again in the December meeting. But where do we feel we are now with all of the evidence and listening that you've heard as it relates to that? So we still have those 4 priorities, and we heard today a potential 5th one, which would be middle school only, right? And that's kind of that would be less than that first bond there. So what we have over here, and I might encourage everybody just to kind of come up single file and just put a dot right next to the column over here. As a reminder, this came out of number 8, that facility planning meeting, and just kind of the target 50% there, target repair costs, again, budgets, not estimates, priorities, year 1, 2, 3, and then 4, which was the $130 million bond. And when you look at this and come up and place your dot in one of these columns, just remember these are additive, right? So 68 would be the baseline, priority 1. 77.6 plus 4 is priority 2. 90.5 plus 4 is priority 3. And then priority 4 is the 130 plus 4 million. Now, what I might encourage is if we really feel strongly about the priority that we heard earlier today, the one with the middle school, just put your dot to the left of that priority 1. And we'll just kind of call that priority.
Hey, Jonah,
Yeah.
I think when we voted last time, we had 2 choices. Can we do that again? Or you just want just
I
the
just
one?
want 1 this time. Yep.
So explain that last priority 0 again.
Just 2 options.
We heard earlier in one of the groups, just middle school. And no improvements elsewhere. 56 million.
And then Jonah, are we wrapped up after that?
We are wrapped up.
Okay.
I think after that.